Hey, everybody. I just wanted to give you a quick note on this podcast, or more specifically on our guest, Sparky Sears. She actually just broke her leg this week. She had to have surgery on it. Super big bummer. So, as you listen to this podcast, keep in mind the fact that she's doing great. She's in great spirits, everything else. But if you can, go give her a follow and wish her well because she's got some recovery ahead of her. And we all want to support her in that. So, just a quick note before we get into it. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the Successful Athletes Podcast, where we interview successful athletes to make you a faster cyclist. Or in this case, we're really going to talk a whole lot about mountain biking and gravel and everything else with Sparky Sears, all the way coming from us in Colorado. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Where are
Thank you
you
for
at in
having me.
Colorado?
Right now, I am up in Tabernash, Colorado, which is right by Winter Park. Normally, we live in Fruita, but we're up here spending some time just getting some training in at altitude. So definitely
Sweet.
a different ball game to be riding at 8,000 feet every day, but it's fun to be up here. It's a beautiful place.
Nice. Awesome. So we are going to talk about your kind of journey through cycling today. Now, Sparky, I've known you for a while now, and I know your husband Noah very well as well. He's also a TrainerRoad subscriber, also and an incredibly good mountain biker,
Yeah.
and not just on the downs. Incredibly good going up. He's a pro downhill racer before, but really fast everywhere now. So, uh, I'm been in tune to your story for quite some time, and I I would phrase it that your improvement has been more rapid than normal for most people, without certainly implying that was in any way easy or automatic. You've done a lot of hard work, but I figured that maybe we could get some insight into your journey through cycling and extract some actionable takeaways for folks that are listening to this and want to be able to get faster, because that's the whole goal. So we should probably
Absolutely.
start at your background, and actually more introducing, I guess, who you are. So you live in Colorado, but you live in Grand Junction. Can you tell us what you do for your career and even like your height, so then people can have kind of like a bearing for people to find?
Sure. So I do have a full-time job. I work for bikeflights.com right now. I also have a second job as a yoga instructor that has been a long time passion of mine. And I actually, like about 10 years ago, I started teaching yoga, and it's been a really big part of my life. So that's my background in addition to that. As for my height, I'm 5'6", and I live in Fruita, Colorado, which is actually just adjacent to Grand Junction. It's very well known for its mountain biking. We have a lot of, like, I want to say, famous trails or epic trails. And it's a very great place to be a mountain biker and be in the sport.
Yeah. It's like I've never been to Fruita. I've been to Moab multiple times, and every time I go to Moab, I say I should have just gone to Fruita. So because it looks awesome, like incredible riding over there. So
It is awesome. We love Moab too. We go there very frequently, but if you ever have the opportunity to come ride, we have a lot of diversity in our terrain, and that's what makes it really fun.
so did you get started in riding there in Grand Junction or in Fruita in that zone?
Yeah, that's where I was living at the time, and I had just met my now husband, Noah. As you mentioned, he's an awesome athlete. He's an incredible rider. He was really into mountain biking, and we met, started dating, and at the time I had no interest in jumping into mountain biking. I thought it was, I thought it was wild what some of these people were doing. And he was totally okay with that as well. The girlfriend that he had had before me was really into mountain biking, and I think there had been some conflict in that relationship with that. So he was really satisfied that I had no interest in it. And then it got to the point where he was traveling a lot for races, and I would go to these races and watch him. And or I would always ask, like, "Oh, you're going riding again today. Like, don't you want to hang out with me?" And he finally got me on a bike. I was a very slow starter. There was no instant enjoyment there for me. I thought it was really hard. I thought it was super challenging. We were mostly riding out at 18 Road, which is more beginner style trail, but I still thought it was so physically hard. And it took me a while to get into it, but eventually got a better bike and started doing some bigger miles. And now I absolutely love it. And it's a huge part of our life.
So what was your athletic background like before that, before riding, before meeting Noah and trying mountain biking?
Sure. I was actually professionally trained as a classical ballerina, which sounds so like non-physical, but is actually very like a very physically demanding form of art. And I had done that since I was 3 up through college, and had danced professionally in college, and had done a lot of summer intensives dancing with companies when I was in college. And it was incredibly rewarding, but I also got very burnt out on it. And I think I was ready and ripe to find something else that taxed my body in a very different way and was very different from dance, but still allowed me to utilize, this physical self that I've been given.
I'm gonna like bookmark that in this conversation because I want to come up or I want to talk later about how that influences your riding. My wife actually, she grew up being trained as a dancer as well, and going through that whole process. And it's always really cool for me to watch how quickly she picks up like movement patterns and coordination and all that stuff, because that's, you just have to drill it over and over. So we'll get into that later. But
Sounds good.
that'll be a cool, I guess, comparison to draw in. So you had gotten to the point where you were enjoying mountain biking and you were in a place where you could go riding all the time. When did it start to get to the point where it was like where you wanted to try racing? And did you start, because usually most of us start with cross country racing, so is that where you started?
I actually started racing enduro, and the reason is that my husband Noah was racing enduro. It was actually very new to the country at this time, and just a new form of the sport, period. So it was really fun. The reason I started racing is that he had gotten an entry to the Crested Butte Big Mountain Enduro and wasn't able to race it for work reasons. So he said, I have a condo, I have this race, why don't you do it? And I thought, well, I have nothing invested. I have nothing to lose. Why don't I go try? And I was, very out of my element. I had never ridden at a resort before. I didn't know what it was like because it was all at Crested Butte Mountain Resort. It was all just mostly downhill riding at the resort. But I absolutely loved it. I loved the companionship with the other women that were there. We had so much fun on the transfer stages, just chatting. The racing was really hard. I found that I got really in the zone and pushed myself super hard. And I was crashing all over the place. I made so many mistakes and I had a blast. I was lucky enough to end up on the podium in the amateur category. And I think that first podium, really, everybody remembers the feeling when you're like, wow, I accomplished something. And that was really fun. And I enjoyed accomplishing, that result. So I was hooked at that point.
That must have been, I assume, like the pre-event anxiety. Clearly, with doing dance and other performances, I'm sure that helped. But how did you manage that? Because enduro racing is pretty intimidating at the BME level, which those that don't know, the Big Mountain Enduro Series, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, series in the United States for enduro racing. So this is it's a big race. And granted, you weren't racing pro, but it's a big race with intimidating terrain. You were new to it. Were you nervous beforehand?
I was definitely nervous, but I also had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I think that is such a freeing thing because, you have no expectations for yourself. You have no expectations for your performance. You don't know what's normal for racing for your first race. You're like, I'm just going to do it. And that's a super freeing place to be in. So I allowed myself just to go and to enjoy it without expecting that I was going to podium or do well or be able to ride all the stages. And that ended up working in my favor, I think, because I was pretty relaxed. And to this day, I still love blind racing where you go and you've never seen the trails before. I think it's so exhilarating. And it's also, again, the same thing. It's very freeing. You don't have expectations for how the performance will go or how the race will go.
So that, man, what about the setbacks you encountered in the middle of the race? Like, because I'm sure that you had moments where it was like, oh no, at some point, whether it was on the bike or like in between stages with mechanicals, I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Crashing makes me mad when I'm racing. So it was, and so I was crashing a lot and I was on the ground a lot. And I remember crashing directly. My sister and her friends had come up to Crested Butte that weekend and were spectating on one stage. And I remember crashing right in front of them, and they're screaming, "Get up, Sparky, get up." And I got up and I was so mad that I was just charging on the pedals and, subsequently making more mistakes. But I had a lot of fun, and like making mistakes has never been, I always want to take ownership of them. And I think I did in that race. And I saw those mistakes and I saw how much I was crashing. I saw how much I was walking the super technical sections. And it was really like provided a lot of motivation for me to get faster at that stuff and to also go back to the basics and learn how to ride better and smoother.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was lucky I did not get injured.
I'm sure. Yeah, enduro racing is pretty extreme stuff. Like it can catch you off guard. With with Noah, what role did Noah play? Clearly he introduced you to riding, but how did he help you in the beginning? Because here's the thing, there are a lot of I even get situations where people write in messages and say, "Hey, my wife or my husband should be on the podcast." And there's this tricky relationship many times that we all share with our partners or our family members or even our friends, where we want to be encouraging, but we don't want to push them too far. Um, how did Noah, what were the good things that Noah did in that aspect with your relationship and helping you get started?
Absolutely. He's an incredibly patient person. I think he's a natural teacher, and he really gave me the space to ride and not provide the constant advice, which is something that I've always struggled with when people are telling you what you did wrong or what you could be doing better. I think he just allowed me to follow him. He went at a pace that was I could maintain, and gave me advice when he knew I was going to hurt myself or when he knew that I was not reaching my potential in a certain way. He also, I joke about this, we laugh about this all the time. He's always saying, "I can't believe that you actually like mountain biking still," because the first bike that he put me on was a completely rigid single speed. So no suspension whatsoever, no gears. I was on flat pedals, and he said, "You're going to learn to utilize your body as suspension. You're going to learn how to, find flow within the trail. You're going to learn how to climb without changing gears." And maybe not the most orthodox entry into this sport, but he was also like, "Maybe you're not going to like it. Maybe we don't want to buy you a really nice bike right away. Why don't you learn on this and then we'll see where you go?" And I ended up loving it. And I was so excited when I got off that bike to get a bike with gears and with suspension. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. So it's okay to start small and grow from there.
Yeah, that's and a good teacher would have to be patient for sure I imagine an area like that, like Grand Junction, Fruta, where there's a lot of really technical riding, a lot of exposed rocks and shelves, kind of like natural shelving that the
Yeah.
rock makes there. Did you start on smooth trails, or did you kind of just jump into the deep end on the really technical stuff? Where did you kind of get started with it?
The first year I was riding, I didn't ride a lot. I probably rode, I want to say less than 10 times. And then I started racing right away. I did that big mountain enduro race and I really wanted to get better. So I kind of asked Noah to help throw me into the deep end, to give me the push off the big diving board. And then really did start riding those more technical trails. And I think, sometimes we can look at every skill that you can learn and you can break it down so much, but there are different learning styles, and I'm very much a kinesthetic learner. So for me, the movement and the actual doing it was how I was going to progress and how I learned. So, just like in that first race, there was a lot of crashing. There definitely were some tears. There were a lot of scratches all over my shins from running flat pedals, but I loved it once I started getting into it.
Yeah. When did you transfer over to cross country from the enduro side? And I guess what year was your first enduro race? And then when did you get into cross country?
Sure. I want to say my first enduro race was in 2013 or 2014. I loved racing enduro. I had a lot of fun with it. But the level started getting incredibly high. And I did start wondering if it was going to be a lifetime endeavor for me, racing enduro, just seeing the level even domestically that enduro started progressing to. And I think had I dedicated myself to that, I could have kept continuing to race it at a high level, but it's scary and it's big stuff. And for me, I wanted to see this as a lifetime endeavor. So
Mm.
I started racing. I did the Grand Junction off-road as my first quote unquote cross country race. And
It's quite the first race there.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that was a big goal for me. And I did very well at it. And I realized that I did like pedaling, and that for me, some things came naturally in terms of fitness. And that was a really good feeling. So I thought that I would start racing endurance. I don't really race cross country, so I mostly do like marathon mountain biking
Hmm.
distance. So
Yeah, the longer distance stuff.
yeah,
What year did you race Grand Junction off road for the first time? Do you remember?
I raced it for the first time in 2014 as an amateur. I did the 40, and then I raced it again in 2015 as an amateur. And then I won that year, and won by a pretty big margin. And it was kind of a wake up call, like, oh, if I win by this big of a margin. And that was the first race I think I compared my times to the pro times. And I looked at their times and was like, I would have done pretty good in pro. I mean, I wouldn't have been podium on the podium, but I would have done pretty well. So Noah said, I think you should step it up. I think it's time for you to push yourself a little more and to challenge yourself by racing pro. And then in 2016, I stepped it up and just started racing pro across the board and everything.
Let's talk about that 2015 race at Grand Junction off road. So you had raced the race before. These are relatively, like home trails for you in the sense that it's within your
Mhm.
area. So you're familiar with kind of just like what to expect from the trails, that sort of stuff. What did you do in that year that led you to win that you weren't doing in the previous years? What made the difference?
Yeah, I think I just started riding more. I had just done a 6-day enduro race. The Big Mountain Enduro had only done this one time, but they did a 6-day enduro race in Crested Butte, and that was so fun and a lot of pedaling. And I knew that it was going to be a lot of big transfer stages. So in advance of that, I had actually just started riding more. I had started commuting to work on a pretty regular basis, so 30 miles a day, 15 there and back. And I started to get into pedaling more. So I didn't do anything to train for it. I didn't even like know that training really was a thing, to be honest. To me, training was just riding more, just putting in more miles, um, just going on Strava, going hard, trying to get QOMs on segments, comparing myself to those fast times. So for me, that was training, and that's really all I did. I think I went out once before the Grand Junction off-road and did butter knife, which is kind of the crux of the race. That's the really long technical 8-mile chunk in the beginning before you just, or in the middle before you descend to the river and then do that long climb out. I think I did that once and I was like, okay, we're ready to go. I got it. And that was all I did to prepare. It's definitely changed for me over the past couple of years, but I felt good at that race and I had a lot of fun doing it, which is something I've always tried to retain, that sense of enjoyment, even when I'm racing.
Yeah. So you mentioned after that race, it was like, all right, I'm going to try racing pro and step up, in your words, to step it up a little. How did your training change then? I guess going from, because what you said before, it was increasing the volume, making sure that you had the technical skill, like, checking those boxes. So how did your training change once you decided to, and once again, like quotes, step it up more?
Sure. The first thing that I did was I switched over to clipless pedals, which I loved riding flat pedals. I think that they are incredible for learning a lot of skills. So I thought, if I'm going to be racing these 50-mile races, everybody at the Grand Junction offer that I passed commented on the fact that I was running, 510s and flat pedals. So I thought that was really crucial to success at a pro level. So I switched over to clipless pedals, and that was the first year that I actually started doing some focus training over the winter. I took my first FTP test. I started riding on snowy days when I couldn't ride inside. I would start riding on the trainer and doing some intervals. I started working a little bit with a coach. His name is Ryan Geiger. I don't work with him anymore, but he's an incredible person. And he taught me a lot that first year about the importance of structure and maintaining consistency with your training. That was a huge eye opener for me. I didn't know that, I knew that people trained, but I didn't know what it was like. I didn't know how important the consistency is. And so I took it pretty seriously that first year. And I was surprised. When you're focused only on skills, you can progress pretty quickly. But I was amazed when I started training and started working with somebody who gave me a training plan, how quickly you progress. It was really eye-opening for me. And when you get a taste of that speed or of that progression, you just want more, and you're really encouraged to keep working harder.
Yeah. So this probably fast forwards us to somewhere around like 2016, I would assume.
Mhm.
And that's when you started using TrainerRoad, right? Around that time.
Yeah, that's correct. And
How
I
do
actually
you,
really, go
yeah, go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry. No, go for it.
I was gonna say, how do you use it? What, like, do you use Plan Builder and then lay out the plans, and then we can probably get into beyond that. We can get into fitting it into your schedule too, because like most of us listening to this, having full time job and going through all that process, we don't just have all the time in the world to train. But probably stepping back, really, how do you use it? Do you use Plan Builder and lay out the plans that way?
I do. So
Sweet.
that is a feature that I've loved since it's been implemented. I think it's awesome. Obviously, this year, like, the plan keeps changing, and that's okay. But I love that you can just delete an event if it gets canceled, and then recalculate your plan based off of that. For me, I love having a plan. I love having something, like, I like knowing what my week is going to look like or what the month is going to look like. I like having those recovery weeks to look forward to. So I use the plan builder, and for the most part, I would say that I follow like 60 to 80% of the workouts on there. I usually do at least 3 days of indoor training. And then weekends are always about riding outside for me and getting out on the mountain bike to do big rides.
Yeah, that's a good approach to do, to fit your structure into your week, into the Monday through Friday, and then allow your weekends to go even more. And then clearly, if you need to fit even more structure in to get even more
Mm-hmm.
improvement to do all that stuff, yeah, then you can make the weekends about structure as well. Sure. But I think a lot of us would probably do best with following that approach, like you're talking about, of even following a low volume plan and making sure that you hit those marks for the low volume plan on 3 really good workouts a week, and then add on the weekend that outdoor riding. It's crucial, I think.
Absolutely. So I usually do like a mid-volume plan on TrainerRoad, and I'll do those three hard workouts during
Hmm.
the week. And those for me are really where I feel I built a lot of fitness. So that's really helpful. Racing longer distances, I always find it really important to do those longer distances on my mountain bike outside on the weekends, just so that I know, what riding 50 miles feels like. And but obviously in the winter, like, this plan changes throughout. We tend to have pretty bad winters actually where we are, and don't often get to ride outdoors a lot. So I'm totally okay with doing quite a bit of indoor riding in the winter. It's something that keeps me sane and keeps me focused on my goals. So in the winter, it'll be different. Sometimes I'll just do all 5 days of training inside on TrainerRoad, and I'm pretty devoted to it because I really appreciate how efficient it is. I like that I can get inside, excuse me, and jump on the trainer. We have a little shed that we use to train in, actually, and Noah has it totally dialed. He has computer screens for us. He has the fans going. He has the television set up and the music, and for me, having a bike that just remains on the trainer the whole time. I use a Wahoo kicker for all my training. Have a bike that stays on there, and then it's just easy to go in there, right before work, get your hour in, and know that you did a lot of hard work, and that hour is really is a good feeling.
Yeah, it does a ton for, like, even just my mental state going on throughout the rest of the day. Doing early workouts like that can be so helpful for that. Is that when you fit in your training, like before work, or do you fit it in at other points?
Yeah, it depends on the day. About half of my work days I work early, so I'll start work at 7. About the other half of my work days I'll start work at noon. So it really depends on the day. If I start at 7, I'll go right after I finish working. I'll jump on the trainer right after, and that still gives me time to go ride with Noah when he's done with work, or to go teach yoga or take a yoga class, go to the gym, etc. Otherwise, if I work later, then yeah, the second I wake up, I like to go get on the trainer after I've had my coffee and a bite to eat, because then I don't really think about it. I just do it. And I know that as soon as I get that exercise in and I get those endorphins flowing, I've started my day off on the right foot. And
Mm. Yeah, with fitting all of that in, how do you balance it with Noah's training? Because that's another question that we get a lot of the time. Now you and Noah don't have any kids, but demanding jobs, and plenty of responsibilities as well. You also have, I think, 2 or 3 little fur babies, little dogs too,
yeah, we
right?
have
So
two fur babies, one miniature dachshund and one miniature pinscher. So I mean, they're not a lot of work, but they do require their walk every day. I take them for a hike every day. So that's another thing that you do have to fit in.
yeah,
With Noah and I think just communication about where we are in our training plan and what we're working towards is super important. We do like to train together indoors. So sometimes we'll say, what's your workout today? We're asking that constantly of the other person. And then we'll go in at the same time to our little, we call it the pain cave, which sounds really weird. Noah's always saying, don't call it the pain cave, but it's a shed that has our trainers in it. So we'll go in there together and get our workout in together. Same goes for when we're riding together. We really try to communicate with each other about what the objectives for that ride are, whether we are going, sometimes one of us wants to go for a Strava segment, sometimes one of us wants to do a workout, and then other days are recovery days. So just communicate with your partner about, if we're riding together, you're welcome to go if you're working hard on something, or if you want to ride together, tell that person if you're tired or if you're in need of a little recovery spin.
yeah.
And
I could see you leading out Noah for some KOMs and vice versa too.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of him going for something and me chasing him down. And believe it or not, that's a huge effort. That's where I've
Oh yeah.
really improved a lot, I think, is chasing him on certain sections of trail. It's fun though. It's really enjoyable for both of us, I think.
Yeah. I want to get into some of the things that the technical skills and the fitness, because you kind of went about this, I would say, backwards from what most people do, in the sense that, at least those that are listening to this podcast, a lot of the time they're athletes that don't have the technical skill first, and they start building the fitness, and then they assume the technical skill will come. However, in many cases, you probably built that technical skill set out to be more robust prior to building out the fitness side. Now, granted, one feeds the other to a certain extent, but uh, was that difficult at all to have the skill set and then, I'll say, not have the fitness, even though you were fit, but not have that trained fitness? Or did you find that to be an advantage when you started?
When I was racing enduro, I was still at an amateur level then, so I didn't really know that the fitness was going to be, or the lack of fitness was going to be a detriment to my performance. I I rode with a lot of people who didn't train, and so for me, it really was the focus on skill. I also started riding with people who were their skill level was so far beyond what the norm is for most riders. So for me, that was where I was going to make the biggest advance. Is if you're not walking stuff on the trail, you're going to be able to keep up better. Um, I I do think it's interesting. I do think that people assume the skills will come, but for me, skill is something that I've always worked on and always made a really concerted effort to get better at. Noah and I will still do what we call session Sundays. We'll go out on a Sunday because those tend to be, a Sunday evening. Maybe we've trained in the morning. We'll go out on a Sunday evening on a really hard trail and just dedicate the time to working on skills, to working on something. So I never have assumed that the skills would just be natural. It's something I've always put a lot of focus into, and I enjoy putting a lot of focus into developing those skills and working hard at it. So because I think I focus so much on skills when I started training, for me it was okay. I've built a skill set here with the physical aspect of biking. Now I need to build a skill set here that has to do with building my fitness and becoming a better climber and becoming a better pedaler. So for me, that's just another skill set, and that's just another like tool in your arsenal that you can use to be a better racer.
Did you, when you were building out your skill set, you mentioned sessioning there. Before that, we were talking about the fact how you would find yourself with these fast riders, and you just kind of like work your way into it. But did you ever do any other like specific things that really helped your skills? Like I almost like if we were to write an article, like a 3 tips for something like that. But what did you find was most helpful in building out your technical skill throughout that whole process?
Sure. So if you want to learn a skill, you have to be riding a trail that is going to help develop that skill. I think we assume that you can ride anything and that you'll get better at certain things. But if you want to be a better jumper, you need to go ride trails that have jumps in them. If you want to be better at riding rocky stuff, you need to ride trails that have those things. So I've always tried to notice resistance in my riding. Like, am I avoiding this trail? Am I avoiding this thing because I'm not good at this skill? And if so, I should probably get on that trail and work on it. We're lucky, like I mentioned earlier, that we have a very diverse network of trails. So we have trails that do have jumps in them. We do have trails that are really technical, really chunky, very natural, very awkward, some of them. So I've always made it my mission to go out and to ride those trails and to use the trails underneath my bike as the place where you can develop skills. I also think, if you're struggling with something, get back to basics, maybe read about some skills, maybe work with a skills coach if that's something that you have the ability to do. And then just follow people who are really good riders and who really have those skills dialed in, because watching their relationship with the trail is so important to learning how you can move differently and learn a skill.
Flipping gears a bit and going toward the fitness side, what were 3 things, or what were, it doesn't have to be 3, but things that you found really accelerated your fitness growth as well?
Sure. So, I mean, everybody is going to say this, but number one is consistency, just having, just following a schedule that obviously that works with your schedule. Like, be kind to yourself and recognize that it's not going to happen every day, or, not every day is perfect, but be consistent. When I get in a good groove and I'm training hard, I notice that I'm also eating better, I'm sleeping better, I'm focusing more on recovery. So for me, it's just about getting in the habit of that consistency and getting in the habit of training. And then everything else kind of supports that. So, when you're training hard, you get tired, you want to go to bed earlier and have a more consistent sleep schedule. But for me, consistency with training. But beyond that, I think one of the ways that I've always progressed quickly is that I've never been scared to say yes to something. I notice with a lot of people that you'll ask them, or you'll say genuinely, let's go for a ride together sometime, and they'll say, no, you're way too fast, like I don't want to ride with you.
Mm.
So don't be afraid. Like, that's something I've never been afraid to say yes to. Like, what a gift it is to be able to follow somebody like Noah down these really technical trails and to learn from him. What a gift it is to be able to go ride with people and to get really outside of your comfort zone and know that you're going to be the weakest link on the ride and be the person holding everybody back. But know that you have a lot to learn there. And that's something I still remind myself of. Like, this year, some of the pro crit racers from the Cliff team moved to Fruta, and we have done some big gravel rides with them.
The
And
Mullerby
since
twins,
the Mullerby
right?
twins, they're
They're the
awesome, and they're
best. Yes.
they're such nice guys. And we've done some big gravel rides with them that, they're very road focused. So they're super good at that. They have the technique and the skills for road racing and riding just dialed in. And that's something I don't have. I've never done any road racing. So riding with them was really intimidating to me. And this is me after 8 years of riding. I'm still intimidated. I still have um, that sense of, like, this is going to be really hard. And that's really good. That's where you grow a lot. So I always tell myself, like, you should be doing a couple rides a month where you're thinking about it the night before with a little bit of anticipation and a little bit of fear and a little bit of giddiness. And that's really where you're going to grow and get faster and stronger.
Mm. Yeah, those are great points. And for those that are listening to this, you can head over to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast. Just Google actually Ask a Cycling Coach Cliff Bar, and you'll get to hear from the Mullerby twins. So Connor and Kevin, awesome guys, really cool,
They're
and they
great. Hi,
provided
guys.
tons of great insights on our podcast too. So we
Yeah,
love the Cliff team.
they're
Uh,
awesome.
they are, aren't they?
Yeah.
Another question I want to ask, going back to the ballet thing. So how do you can you draw any parallels between the two sports? And then which it's seemingly so different in the sense that like mountain biking, especially in an area like Grand Junction, is so violent and rough a lot of the time with the drops and the rocks and everything else. So can you draw parallels between the two? And then let's get into like maybe technique and advantage that you have coming from ballet into mountain biking.
Sure. I think you can draw a lot of parallels. Ballet is one of those unique things that you put. It's the same thing with writing. You don't see what goes into the final product, and you don't see the sweat that goes into it. You don't see in ballet, you're putting in endless amounts of time in the studio with your daily practice, bar every day, class every day, rehearsal every day. And then you go out on stage and it's over in an hour or 2 hours. And your time on stage is probably, 30 minutes of that. So you're focused on the most minute details. And that's something I think that to be a really strong writer, you should be focusing on the minute details. You should be focusing on how, if you change one thing in your writing, how that affects your performance. If you change one thing in your skills, how that enables you to move the bike differently. So I think it's very similar in that the work is behind the scenes. You don't often see the work when you see somebody with a really strong finish. You don't always know what they're doing to put in that kind of effort. So for me, it's always been a good reminder, like, there's other people who work really hard behind the scenes to get to where they are. And that's very humbling, and it's really encouraging too.
Yeah, that should remind all of us that it can feel like drudgery at times when you're going through and on a hard day when the workout just is not coming along easily. And it is important to really remember the fact that these sort of things take time and they take effort,
Yeah.
and we have to be willing to dedicate and dedicate ourselves to that. And ballet is such a craft of perfection in a lot of ways, I feel like, in the sense that it's these, like you said, it's the movements and everything else that you're practicing. You practice them daily with so much discipline, and that sport is renowned for its discipline. Has that helped you at all with technique as well? Because that's one thing just from the outside in. You do have, from what I've seen from Noah's videos and everything else, very, very impressive technique on a bike in terms of your body's in the right position at all times. Do you find you have like a spatial awareness advantage almost in that regard?
I do think that really helped me in that regard. You have you're really in touch with your body and the way that it moves. And I think people who do more physical sports maybe necessarily don't come into biking with that background of really understanding that spatial awareness and how to move gracefully. There are times where I'll be riding, and I remember riding Mac Ridge, which is a pretty technical trail in Fruta, and Noah turned around and looked at me and said, you rode that way better than I did. And I think it is that balletic background, that knowledge of the body and just how to allow the bike to move with the body has been a huge advantage for me, and has really enabled me to kind of understand how the physical body works in tune with the bike, in tune with the trail. It's very different, but there are a lot of similarities there, and I can be grateful for that ballet background, and that it did offer me a little bit of an advantage with riding mountain bikes.
I've got two more questions here at the end. One of them actually is one that you and I didn't talk about beforehand, so I'm springing it on you a bit. But what advice do you have for career women? Because that's like that's a spot where I think a lot of the time we give women who are mothers kind of like that's an exceptional group and it's such a great responsibility, and it absolutely is. But I think we do so many times at the, I guess, at the expense of discrediting perhaps just the fact that carrying a career is a lot. And then also, to be frank, also being a female in the sport of cycling, you're also in many cases fighting an uphill battle because the sport is very much built around men, as it should not be. But that is the reality. So any advice that you have for training and striving for something as a career, as a woman with a career?
Yeah, I would say that I struggled with that at the beginning of racing professionally. I really faced a lot of imposter syndrome. I really felt like I didn't belong there. I questioned myself, even when I had really good results. I questioned whether I belonged racing at that professional level. So I would just say to women, like, give yourself permission to be great and to be bold in your endeavors. Don't be afraid to ride by yourself and to do these huge rides. Don't be afraid to ride with people who are a lot faster than you, and take pride and ownership in your accomplishments. That's something that I'm still working on a lot. Don't finish a race on top of the podium and then mitigate your accomplishment by saying that there were only 6 other women there. You know, take pride in what you've done and the work that you've put in. As a career woman, for me, I love that I can feel fulfilled intellectually and then fulfilled physically as well. It's always been an opportunity to find balance in my life. And I'm somebody who does better when I have a lot going on, when I can feel fulfilled in many different ways. So I never have felt like my career, my work has detracted from my ability to perform. I never want to make excuses for my performance. And that's something that I would also urge other women to keep in mind, that regardless of whether you're a mother, whether you have a career, whether you have these other things that are pulling you in other directions, if you're putting in the work to be great, then don't make excuses for that greatness. Just own it and work harder. Also, as a woman, there's a few goals that I have in mind right now that are really fun and really big and intimidating. And they're goals that have been kind of discussed a lot by men. One of them is that I'd really like to take the women's fastest known time on the White Rim Trail in Moab. That was just standardized by Payson last year. And then I know a bunch of guys like Keegan Swenson came and took the record. I really enjoyed following that process of them like competing with each other, and had this sense of like, well, where are the women in this? Like, let's see some women step up. So I think it's really important for women to step up and take their position in a sport that is consistently dominated by men. Nobody's going to give a position to you. So we are responsible for going and taking it and for carving our own path in the sport.
That's awesome. That's cool. I was going to ask you, that was the next question that I was going to spring on you here, was what's next? Like what are your next goals? So, so the White Rim would be an exciting one. That one's just so logistically tough too, because
Yeah.
it's, I assume you would do it self-supported.
Yes, I'll do it
Yeah.
self-supported, and I'll definitely follow what has become kind of the standardized route now, just to make sure that it's all on the up and up. But I love those kind of challenges that are self-supported. A lot of the rides that I do, yeah, I mean, I ride by myself still quite a bit of the time. So for me, this is going to be fun, and I think I'll really enjoy doing it. So that's definitely a big goal. I'd also like to go after the Coco Pelli record sometime, which is still held by
Cool.
Rebecca Rush. Kind of a funny story about the Coco Pelli record is that when I was just starting to ride bikes, like had been riding for a few months, Rebecca actually did the Coco Pelli and got the record. She finished in Fruta. I think she had broken her hand when like a couple hours into the record.
Wow.
And she had all the Red Bull media people out at the finish. And the next day, one of the girls from Over the Edge, which is a big bike shop in Fruta, called me and said, "Hey, Sparky, so Rebecca Rush got the record, but she's in the hospital right now because she broke her hand. I think she broke her hand. And she needs a fill-in for some of the filming that they want to do of the finish." And I was like, "Would you be willing to do it?" And I was like, "Well, sure, I'll do it." And Rebecca eventually decided that she's a total badass. She went out there and did it. Despite her hand injury, she did the filming by herself. That to me was like a pretty inspiring story, and was like, oh, wow, there are some pretty amazing women out there. And after I heard about her record, I read her book and was So that goal is still one that's on there, just to see if I can do that after so many years of first hearing about the record.
That's cool. That's like almost like a return to the roots, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. How cool. Those will be fun. Those will be fun races then. How can people get in touch with you and kind of follow and see what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I'm on Strava. I have every single one of my rides on Strava. It had just started when I started biking. So, you can follow me on there. I'm also on Instagram at iMoir, IMOIR, and pretty much just talk about bikes on Instagram. I'd also say follow my husband, Noah Sears, at Noah Sears on Instagram. Both of us like to share a lot about the trips that we take biking and the things that we do together.
And they're awesome, just fantastic people. Me speaking to all the listeners, you two are just so great. So, and Noah's also just like you with bike flights. Noah, he runs a company, or I should say helps run, because I'm sure it's a large team effort
Mhm.
there as well. But MRP, mountain racing products, they make really cool stuff. Just it's really great. You two are just awesome. And Sparky, I appreciate you so much doing this, because I feel like there's some great takeaways from this, and how to up your skill set technically on the fitness wise. Like you said, it's so funny, but I mean, if you talk to top athletes like Kate Courtney, or if you talk to anybody that's just starting out and really starting to figure it out, consistency is key. Like it's one of the
Yeah.
biggest things. So interesting that you point that out. And then support system with your companion, tons of great information from this one. So I just really appreciate it a ton. So thanks for doing this. If anybody listening to this wants to be on this podcast, you can go to trainerroad.com/podcast and you look for a link that'll say, are you looking for the Successful Athletes podcast? You just click on that. And then there's a spot where now you can fill out on a form and go through the whole process. I would love to hear from you about how TrainerRoad has helped you achieve something. It doesn't have to be some sort of crazy world championship. It can be anything that you deem successful in any way. So please let us know. We all want to hear that. And head over to trainerroad.com and tell your friends that are not listening to this or listening to this right now to do the same thing. We have tons of stuff on there. You can build your plans before you even start, so you can see what it's like. You can use the strength training calculator, tons of stuff. So check all of that out. Sparky, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat with you, and I hope that I can ride with some of the listeners here soon.
That would be awesome. Yeah, good
That would be
call.
great.
Hopefully at an Epic Rides race coming up, right? When they come
Absolutely.
back.
Fingers crossed I'll be back soon.
That's right. Thanks, Sparky.
Thank you.